It started in a silence so profound I could hear the dust settling. The community library was supposed to close an hour ago. I was supposed to be reshelving the philosophy section, a mindless task for a part-time job. But then I saw her, a lone figure reflected in the dark rain-streaked window, standing motionless in the poetry aisle. Elara. She wasn't doing anything. Just standing there, her head tilted as if listening to a whisper from the books. Her coat, a heavy, dark wool, was damp at the shoulders. She must have come in just before I locked the doors, and I, lost in my own world, hadn't noticed. I should have coughed, announced myself. Instead, I watched. The way her fingers, bare of any ring, traced the spine of a thick, blue-bound collection. The way a single, silver-streaked strand of hair had escaped her bun and curled against her neck. She was in her mid-40s, with a quiet grace that made the air around her feel different, heavier. I must have made a sound, a shifted foot on the old floorboard. She turned. Her eyes, a gray I'd only ever seen in sea-worn glass, found me in the dim light. There was no startle in them. Just a slow, deep recognition, as if she'd known I was there all along. "I've overstayed," she said, her voice lower than I remembered from her brief visits. It wasn't an apology. It was a statement, floated into the space between us. "The door was probably already locked," I said, my own voice feeling too young, too rough for the hush of the room. "The rain, it's really coming down." We stood like that for a long moment, the only sound the relentless tap-tap-tapping against the window panes. Then, she did something that unmoored me completely. She held out the book in her hand. "Is this any good?" I crossed the space, the worn Persian carpet swallowing my footsteps. When I took the book from her, our fingers brushed. A simple, accidental thing. But her skin was cool from the damp air, and the point of contact sent a jolt of warmth straight up my arm. I looked down at the book. Rilke. "It depends," I managed, my throat tight. "Do you like being quietly dismantled?" A faint, almost invisible smile touched her lips. It didn't reach her eyes. "Sometimes it's a welcome change." I was close enough now to smell the rain on her coat, a clean, cold scent mixed with something else, something like old books and sandalwood. Her perfume. I could see the fine lines at the corners of her eyes, the subtle weariness in her posture. It wasn't a weakness. It was a map. And I wanted, more than anything, to read it. Her gaze held mine, and the silence stretched, taut and electric. The air grew thick with everything we weren't saying. I could feel the weight of the empty library around us, a cathedral to this unspoken thing. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I opened my mouth, not knowing what would come out, a stupid question about the weather, an offer of an umbrella, anything to keep her there for one more minute. But before a single sound could escape, the main door of the library rattled violently on its hinges, the sound a gunshot in the quiet. A key fumbled in the lock. Her eyes widened, the connection between us snapping. She took a sharp step back, the spell broken. And the door swung open. The intruder was just the night janitor, Carlos, his radio crackling with static. He gave us a gruff, apologetic nod before trundling his cart towards the bathrooms. The moment was shattered, the library suddenly feeling ordinary and exposed. Elara picked up her bag, the smooth leather a stark contrast to her slightly trembling hand. "I should go." "Let me walk you out," I said, the words coming out too quickly. "The steps get slippery when they're wet." She didn't agree, but she didn't refuse, letting me fall into step beside her as we walked through the cavernous silent halls. I could feel the heat of her arm just inches from mine. "I used to come here with my husband," she said, her voice so quiet it was almost lost under the hum of the fluorescent lights. "A long time ago." The statement hung there, a deliberate piece of her past offered like a key. It explained the way she moved through this place, with a sense of ownership and loss. "I'm sorry," I mumbled, the standard response feeling entirely inadequate. "Don't be." She stopped at the heavy oak door, turning to face me. "It's just, this place holds echoes. Sometimes they're louder than others." Her eyes searched my face, and I felt painfully young, transparent. She was seeing my attempts to seem older, my carefully constructed quietness, and seeing right through them. What did a 26-year-old know about echoes? I reached past her to push the door open, my arm brushing against the front of her coat. I felt her intake of breath, a small, sharp sound. I froze there, trapped in the doorway, closer to her than I had any right to be. The scent of rain and sandalwood was dizzying. She looked up at me, her gaze dropping for a fraction of a second to my mouth before returning to my eyes. The air between us crackled, charged with everything we weren't saying, the age gap, the whispers it would cause, the sheer, illogical risk of it. "I should." She began, but her sentence faded into the damp night air. My hand was still on the door, my knuckles white. I could feel the warmth of her body through the cool wool of her coat. I didn't move. She didn't move. And in that suspended silence, her hand came up, her fingers gently brushing a stray droplet of rain from the sleeve of my jacket. The touch was fleeting, a whisper of skin against denim, but it burned. Her eyes held mine, wide and a little frightened, and in that look was the entire, terrifying confession. The spell was broken by the shrill buzz of my phone in my pocket. We jumped apart as if scalded. The screen lit up with a friend's name, a reminder of a world that existed outside this rain-soaked bubble. I fumbled to silence it, my face heating. "Sorry." Elara had already taken a step back into the rain, wrapping her coat tightly around herself, a visible shield going up. "You should get that." "It's no one," I said, too quickly, stuffing the phone back into my pocket. The damage was done. The moment had fractured, and in its place rushed a cold, sharp reality. What were we doing? I could see the same calculation in her eyes, the sudden, stark awareness of the years between us. "This is," she shook her head, a sad, almost imperceptible motion. "I'm old enough to be. I have a life. Responsibilities. You have your whole life ahead of you." Each word was a brick she was carefully laying between us. "I'm not a child," I said, the defensiveness in my voice proving her point. "I know." Her gaze was unbearably soft. "That's the problem." The rain began to fall harder, plastering her hair to her forehead. She was going to turn and walk away, and this fragile, impossible thing would be over before it began. Panic, raw and urgent, tightened my chest. I stepped forward, under the shelter of the doorway, closing the distance she had created. "Elara." She looked up, her eyes wide, her breath catching. Her name hung in the air between us, a confession in itself. My hand came up, not to touch her, but to hover near her cheek, a question. I could feel the warmth of her skin in the cold air. Her lips parted. She didn't pull away. She leaned, just a fraction of an inch, into the space where my hand almost was. It was a silent surrender, a terrifying agreement. And then her eyes flickered over my shoulder, back into the lit library. "Someone's watching," she whispered, her voice strained. I didn't turn. I didn't care. My entire world had narrowed to the space between our bodies, to the electric charge that pulled us together against every rational thought. "Let them watch," I murmured, my voice low. Her resistance crumbled. Her hand came up and covered mine, not pushing it away, but pressing my palm firmly against her cool, wet cheek. Her eyes closed, a single tear mixing with the rain. We stood there, frozen in the doorway, my thumb stroking her cheekbone, our breathing ragged and synchronized, closer than we had any right to be, and completely, utterly lost. For a week, I saw only her absence. The poetry aisle remained empty. The silence in the library felt like a judgment. I was a fool to think a woman like her, with her echoes and her quiet grief, would risk it all for a boy who shelved books for a living. The guilt was a cold stone in my stomach. I'd pushed too hard, been too obvious. Then, on a Thursday, she was there. Not in poetry, but in the forgotten history section in the basement, a place of dusty archives and deep quiet. She stood before a large folio of old town maps, her posture rigid. She didn't turn as I approached, but I saw the tension in her shoulders. "I couldn't stay away," she said, her voice raw, as if the words had been scraped from her. "I tried. I told myself it was a moment of madness. A lapse." I stopped a few feet behind her, my heart hammering against my ribs. The air was thick with the smell of old paper and decay. "Was it?" I asked. She turned then, and her face was a map of its own, of conflict, of longing, of fear. "No," the word was a whisper, but it echoed in the cavernous room. "It's all I can think about. Standing in my kitchen, teaching my class, lying in my bed, it's just your hand on my face. The look in your eyes. It's an obsession. And it's not fair to you." "Don't decide what's fair for me," I said, stepping closer. The space between us crackled. I could see the pulse fluttering at the base of her throat. "I'm twice your age," she breathed, but it was a weak protest, her eyes locked on mine. "You're Elara." A small, broken sound escaped her lips. I reached out, my hand trembling, and brushed a strand of that silver-streaked hair from her cheek. My fingers lingered, tracing the line of her jaw. She leaned into the touch, her eyes fluttering closed for a second, a silent confession of surrender. Her hand came up and fisted in the front of my shirt, not to push me away, but to anchor herself. To pull me closer. The feel of her, solid and real and leaning into me, sent a jolt through my entire body. I could feel the warmth of her through the thin cotton of my shirt. Her breath brushed against my neck, quick and shallow. "This is a terrible idea," she whispered, her forehead now resting against my shoulder, her body swaying into mine. "I know," I murmured into her hair, my voice low and rough with a need I no longer tried to hide. My other hand found the small of her back, pressing her gently against me until there was no space left, until I could feel every curve and line of her. She tilted her head up, her lips inches from mine, her eyes dark and full of a terrifying, beautiful hope. "Then tell me to stop," I whispered, my mouth so close to hers I could almost taste her. She didn't tell me to stop. Instead, her breath hitched, a soft, surrendering sound. "I can't." It was all the permission I needed. I closed the final, impossible distance, and my lips met hers. It wasn't a gentle first kiss. It was a dam breaking. It was weeks of longing, of guilt, of watching from a distance, unleashed in a single, searing connection. Her hands came up to frame my face, her fingers cool against my burning skin, holding me there as if I might vanish. The taste of her, rain and black coffee and something uniquely, essentially her, would be imprinted on me forever. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathing as if we'd run a mile. Her eyes were wide, dazed. We stood forehead to forehead in the dusty silence, our hands still clinging to each other. "My husband," she whispered, the words a ghost between our lips. "He didn't just leave echoes." I went still. The world, which had shrunk to the space of our bodies, began to expand again, cold and sharp. She pulled back just enough to look at me, her gaze filled with a fresh, more profound guilt. "He's not a memory. Not in the way you think." Her voice was fragile. "He's in a care facility. 40 minutes from here. A traumatic brain injury. 5 years ago." The words landed like physical blows. The cold stone of my own guilt was suddenly an iceberg. I had painted him as a ghost, a benign absence. I had kissed a married woman. The weight of it pressed down, suffocating. "I come here," she continued, her voice breaking, "because it's the only place that still feels like the life we had before." Her thumb stroked my cheek, a tender gesture that now felt like a brand. "And then there was you. And for the first time in 5 years, I didn't want to live in the past. I wanted this. And I am so ashamed. I should have stepped back. I should have let the chasm her words had created open between us. But I didn't. My hands, of their own volition, slid from her back to her hips, pulling her closer still, as if my body refused the truth my mind was screaming. Elara, I had no words. There were none. She looked at me, her eyes pleading, not for forgiveness, but for understanding. For a decision. And in the crushing silence, with the weight of her truth settling over us, I made it. I leaned in and kissed her again, slowly, deeply, a silent answer to a question we were both too afraid to ask out loud. It was a confession, an acceptance, a terrible, beautiful promise. It was the point of no return. The kiss in the archives had changed everything, and nothing. The world outside the library remained, with its unyielding rules and judgments. We both carried the weight of her secret, a third presence that stood between us in every glance, every accidental brush of hands. A few days later, I found her sitting on the wide marble steps at the library's main entrance, the setting sun casting long, deep shadows. She looked up as I approached, her face a mask of quiet resignation. "I can't do this to you," she said, her voice steady but hollow. "This, shadow life. The guilt is eating me alive." I sat beside her, not touching, the cold marble a stark contrast to the heat I felt whenever I was near her. "It's my choice, Elara. My guilt to carry, too." "You're 26, she said, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "You shouldn't be carrying a married woman's burdens. You should be with someone you can hold hands with in the sunlight. Someone you can tell your friends about." "I don't want someone," I said, the words leaving no room for argument. "I want you. The you that exists in this complicated, painful, beautiful reality. Not some sunlit fantasy." She finally turned to look at me, her gray eyes shimmering. "What are we doing, then? Meeting in dusty corners? Stealing moments? For how long?" I reached out, my hand hovering in the space between us. This was the choice. To step into the shadows with her, or to let her walk back into her lonely world of duty and memory. "For as long as we have," I whispered. "However we can." A tear escaped, tracing a path down her cheek. I didn't wipe it away. I simply laid my hand, palm up, on the cold step between us. An offering. A question. She looked at my hand, then at my face, her internal war visible in the tight line of her mouth, the tremble of her chin. The air was thick with the scent of coming night and her sandalwood perfume, with the unspoken acknowledgement of the difficult, imperfect path we were choosing. Slowly, as if moving through deep water, she placed her hand in mine. Her fingers were cold, but they laced with mine, gripping with a desperate, final strength. It wasn't a happy ending. It was a beginning, fraught with complication and certain heartbreak. But in that moment, as our hands locked together on the cold stone, we understood each other completely. We were choosing the impossible, not because it was right, but because the alternative, a life without this specific, flawed, electric connection, was a quieter kind of death. We were surrendering, not to passion alone, but to the terrifying, beautiful truth of what we had become to each other. We didn't go to a fancy restaurant or a movie. We walked, her hand still tucked securely in mine, to a small, deserted city park. The night was cool, and the only light came from a distant street lamp, casting everything in a soft, silver glow. We sat on a bench, our shoulders touching, the silence between us now a comfortable, shared thing instead of a tense one. "People will talk," she said, her voice quiet but no longer filled with dread. It was just a fact. "Let them," I replied, my thumb stroking the back of her hand. "They don't know you. They don't know the sound of your laugh when you truly mean it, or the way you get lost in a poem." She leaned her head against my shoulder, a heavy, trusting weight. "And you?" she asked. "What will you tell your friends? Your family?" "The truth," I said simply. That I met someone. That she's kind, and strong, and she sees me. The rest is just noise. She lifted her head then, and in the dim light, I could see the last of her doubts fading from her eyes, replaced by a weary, wondrous acceptance. She brought her hand up and cupped my jaw, her touch firm and sure. All this time, I thought I was waiting for my old life to come back, she whispered. But maybe I was just waiting for you to walk into the library. I turned my face and pressed a kiss into her palm, a slow, deliberate promise. There were no more grand speeches, no more agonizing over the right or wrong of it. There was just this, the warmth of her beside me, the scent of night and her skin, the solid reality of our intertwined fingers. We sat there for a long time, not speaking, just breathing in the new, fragile world we had chosen to build together. It wasn't perfect. It was messy and complicated and would require a strength I was only just beginning to understand. But as I felt her relax fully against me, her head finding its place once more on my shoulder, I knew it was real. And for now, for us, that was more than enough. Did you enjoy the story? What kind of stories would you like to hear next? Let me know in the comments.